Hi, I'm James and welcome back to the regular viewers. Today we're going to look at a vehicle unique to Twilight 2000, the M115A1 Armoured Cavalry Combat Vehicle. Now, in Twilight 2000, the US Army had been procuring LAV-25s for the light divisions, and in the mid-90s, as emergency production of these was increased, there were a surplus number of turrets because of the variants that I'm going to cover in a future video. Because there weren't enough M3s, the idea was to fit some of these surplus turrets onto M113 chassis. These became the XM115 surrogate cavalry fighting vehicle, until in February 96 it was standardised as the M115A1 Armoured Cavalry Combat Vehicle. Now, these continued being produced into 1998 until damage to industry stopped any future conversions. Now, only one unit was fully equipped with these, which was the 163rd Armoured Cavalry Regiment. However, quite a few were sent as surrogate vehicles to other cavalry squadrons, both in the United States and in Europe. So plenty of them were used. It doesn't mention any being sent to the Middle East. However, I can't see any reason why they shouldn't. You can always class it as it just wasn't documented. Now, there is a little bit of an oddity. It says that these were created from M113A3s, yet when you look at the vehicle illustrated here, it's clearly an earlier version because it doesn't have the extension fuel tanks on the rear. So if you want to be picky, I suppose you could always argue that the M115 was converted from M113A1s and the A1 version was created from M113A3s, but that's just being picky. So that's a little bit of the background to the vehicle. It's not going to be a particularly common vehicle in the game, as it was only issued to the Armoured Cavalry Regiments officially. We all know what it was like for people acquiring it, but it's a nice, flavourful example. So I'm going to look at how to actually build one for your games. It's worth noting that the M115 is not the first vehicle where this technique was applied. It was used by the Australians in Vietnam, who mounted Saladin turrets on top of the M113. They then went on to use the Scorpion turret, which is what Battlefront is a model of as the Australian MRV. And the British did something very similar for the Berlin Brigade, where they converted the 432 to the 432-30 by mounting the turret of a scimitar on top. To build an M115, you'll need parts from two kits. I've used the Australian MRV and the LAV-25 to get the parts. You can use different kits, for example the M163 kit, and we'll look at that one later on because that actually will work out a bit cheaper. Now, when you look at what we've got the hull and the suspension comes from the M113 kit. The turret part comes from the LAV-25 kit. Now, I've used the spare turret I had, having built some of the variants which don't use that. I've also used the two crew figures which are optional from it. They've got the benefit of being American rather than the Australians with the berets that you get with the MRV kit. And I've used the resin MRV hull top. It doesn't fit particularly well with the turret. However, building up the inside and using magnets will soon solve that problem. So that's what I've used. Let's have a look at how it went together. Okay, I'm going to start off by assembling the turret. No reason to do the turret first. It goes together very nicely. Fortunately, because the M115 used a standard LAV-25 turret, it's very easy to put together. It's a very nice model kit, the LAV-25. So I fix the base to it. I tend to then put the stowage on next. I've assembled mine clean of stowage, but if you're playing Twilight 2000, piling as much stowage on as you can is entirely reasonable and appropriate. So we'll just fit the turret basket on. A little bit of an awkward fit. That's probably just me. There we go, squared away nicely now. So we'll start now on the hatch. I'm building it open with the M240 machine gun as there as well. You could build it quite happily without the machine gun and with a closed hatch, which would simplify it. I did find with these, cutting the command figures down slightly was a big help. Not so much with this one will work fine, but for the hull position it looked unnatural. The arms were resting in mid-air and so on, so I cut it down to just the top part of the figure. The bit I always hate fitting is the hatch. Now, little practical tip with this, from what I've seen in various histories of Normandy where snipers were an issue. What they would often do is use the hatch as a backdrop to make them harder to spot for a sniper. There's a very good illustration, for example, of a Churchill which had hatches that split down the middle and open to the sides, where they'd actually put a metal plate behind so the commander wasn't silhouetted against the background. So moving on to the hull, unlike some of the Battlefront kits, these aren't keyed to left and right. However, there is a little protrusion at the front which fits a protrusion at the front of the hull, with the end result it's very hard to get them the wrong way round. So let's put the two sets of tracks on. I quite like it, these single piece tracks. I grew up using Airfix kits and they were absolute nightmares to assemble the track units, so I do quite like these. Getting a bit low on glue there, so I looked at getting some more. Frustrating when you've got about a third of a bottle and you still can't actually get at it with the brush easily. So the rear plate goes on quite easily. The rear door then could be assembled open or closed. For me, because I'm not building it as a diorama, closed is probably going to look better. So let's put that in there. Okay, so that's the main part of the hull, but we've still got the front to go. Again, it fits on quite nicely. Quite amusing from my perspective that they actually have it compartmentalised, just like on the real one, with the engine off to one side, boxed in. So, yeah, one of those little minor things. Let's put the splash plate on. I've seen some quite nice modifications in 20mm with these, where they've actually been put forward. Not something I've seen that often in Europe, so I've modelled it in the standard closed position, and that slips on quite nicely there. Just make sure I line it up right. So that's two of the three assemblies done, and this is probably the easiest assembly. I was surprised actually the glue took as well as it did. Usually with resin I find I need to switch to super glue, but I fit the driver's hatch on. Now be careful when you're fitting the driver's hatch on, because it actually hinges not quite straight at the rear. If you have a look at the driver's periscope, if that would be completely straight forward when the hatch closes, then you've got it on right. And as I said, I put the cut down crew figure in there as well. It just looks a bit more realistic. It will limit me being able to turn the turret, but I wanted one that looked a bit out of action, just driving, as opposed to one that was actually in the middle of a firefight. And there are our three sections all assembled. Now I'm going to fit these without gluing, because that way I can swap the top off and replace it with a completely new top. So for example, I could assemble the 901 improved tow launcher and fit that. The only thing when you do that is you do have to cheat slightly and use an incorrect hatch. I had some spares that looked about right. If somebody notices that you're missing the driver's vision port, then they are a serious rivethead, and I'm very impressed. A cheaper way to actually build the M115 is, rather than buying the MRV kit, is to actually buy the M163 kit. If you look at the hull, it's designed to actually fit the same turret size as the LAV 25, so it will fit straight on. It looks slightly different. I'm not entirely sure that the reloading hatch would be appropriate. There is a bit of an issue with trying to decide which is the more historically accurate, because it's not a historical vehicle. The guide for Twilight 2000 does mention about there being a hatch on the rear deck. So you pay your money and take your choice. It hasn't bothered me too much because I've decided to use the Scorpion turrets for something else, so they're useful to have for me as spares. But it is just something to consider, particularly if you're on a budget. That might be a better way to do it.